Previously on Stay in Your Lane.
The biggest problem that's happening is that there's a lot of fraud out there. There's a lot
Mhm.
of, there's a lot of trucking fraud, and that's not happening on the docks of like New York City. It's happening in the sticks, and it's a dangerous place to be out there. You can make that argument, and there's an issue, and they're dealing with it. I mean, that you can say that part of it. I mean, part of those bad hombres the president talked about so many years ago. That's a country problem.
Well, and I think that comes down to just like this. We're talking about legislation that's been on the books since the 30s, right?
Mhm.
For English language
Right.
proficiency. I mean, it all hinges on enforcement, but somewhere along the way we've gotten off track. Because to your point, I think there's a criminal element out in the rural areas. I think there always has been. It was just probably not as visible. And then you look at a lot of the cities that are struggling from a crime perspective, and I would almost say it's society perspective. I think there are still tons of great people in bad neighborhoods, and there are great people in rural and suburb areas from a security and a fraud and a freight fraud perspective and theft. um, I would say 100% that's a lot of outside the country involvement where technology has outpaced security across our industry.
Absolutely.
And so you saw it in the banking business and the credit card fraud, and now you got chip cards. Now you gotta put in your zip code, and you have to give information before it gets approved. Now you get a text if anybody uses your credit card over whatever you have for a limit from security, in real time, immediately. So they have shored that up. But our industry is so fragmented. The trucking industry, your supply chains, all being upheaved because of this. The rail industry is getting pummeled with theft off of rail cars, and the over the road, the trucking problems are going to force people to change policy. Companies, shippers, brokers like ourselves here at Triple T, we've changed and ratcheted up policy beyond what we would like to think that you have to do, but we have to because we have to understand what's going on and then protect our clients from it and our carriers, right? So you got impersonation, you got FMCSA with 11,000 plus new authorities within 3 years that were opened and closed within 2 weeks. And that was all fraud. So, from what I understand, FMCSA is getting a full overhaul from a security perspective. And Sean Duffy said that that's where they're gonna take FMCSA. So the the reaction is happening from the action that has happened. The question is, how long is it going to take, and what's it going to look like for everybody, right? What does this look like? So I think if you look at Sean Duffy, um, the ELP mandate, Trump's policy with America First, American truck drivers first, border security, fentanyl and drugs across. They're going to finish the wall. They've got the funding I saw to do that, so nothing's going to stop that. And then I think the main thing is safe roads is what he presents. He wants safe roads.
Oh,
So
100%. And that should be the goal for everyone. And I think that's one of the biggest frustrations I've had since I've been covering trucking because the tropes are out there. You know, the, you know, pill popping truckers that drive for hours on end,
excuse me.
people still buy into that. And it's like, do you understand that these are family people? These are dads,
Moms
mothers.
and dads,
Yes, they're
grandpas.
everybody else. They're
Yep.
wanting to get home safely to their family just like anybody else. And when you have predatory hiring practices by motor carriers, when you have motor carriers pushing them beyond the brink, I'm actually sitting here, I've got a lawsuit, it's a federal indictment actually. This outfit, they had 11 different motor carrier entities. They had a guy that drove 1,900 miles in without stopping and I mean, it's some bad stuff in here. And that goes back on the motor carrier because nobody wants to live like that. I can't, I find it very, very difficult, for the vast majority of people. Why would you want to live a life like that? And so, to have them talk about increasing truck parking, withdrawing the speed limiter rulemaking, so that we don't have yahoos behind two speed limited trucks doing stupid stuff trying to get around them, increased hours of service flexibility. You need to take a nap, stop and take a nap. I mean, we need those pilot programs to prove that truckers can safely navigate within the hours of service framework. So there's just so many good things. And then they're just taking a look at the needless regulations that we've got on there. I mean, that book is ginormous. It is huge. It is so full of regulations that mean nothing about safety, and it's all about compliance.
And
And
unenforced. That's the other thing too. And the thing is, it goes back to what John said. It's like, so much of it is unenforced. That's what the craziest part. People say there ought to be a law, and you're like, there is.
Right.
You'll hear that all the time where you're like, there ought to be a law. And I'm like, no, no, dude, there is. They're just not enforcing it. I mean, that goes back to the English proficiency. Somebody ought to pass a law. I'm like, there's a law. I mean, it's one of the craziest things about a lot of what goes on with the regs. We don't need more regs. We don't
We
need
need
more regs.
less regulations, more enforcement focused on where it needs to be enforced.
right.
There's a certain reality about that. Now, here's the big question: is the fact that is it going to be enough? That's the other thing too, is the fact that it doesn't make any difference how much easier you make it to be a truck driver. If the rates don't improve, it ain't going to make a damn bit of difference. I
Well,
mean, there are
now
people who
that's the fun part of this conversation. If you take all of these things, let's say all of these agendas from this administration happen, what impact is that going to make on capacity? Because as I was talking to Costello week before last, and there's still too much capacity for the amount of demand at the moment.
way
So, right. So, with that being said, how much capacity will the ELP enforcement, the non-domiciled auditing of non-domiciled CDL drivers, how much is that going to take out? And you look at the agenda of what they're doing. How much is that going to take from a capacity perspective? Does anyone really know?
Jamie, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, okay, let's start with non-domiciled CDLs. Those were started for a very different reason than what they are being used for, partially or all, and I'll get back to that in just a second. But the whole point of non-domiciled CDLs was so a student from one state could go to a trucking school in another state and test out and get a CDL in that state instead of having to drive back home to their home state. Now, I'll give you one guess who was behind that, initiative. That was the big fleets. They didn't like the training these drivers and then send them home to their home state, and they never showed back up to work their indentured servitude, student job or whatever.
Okay.
So that's kind of, and then the camel got its nose under the tent, so to speak. And the states started going, well, if we can do it for domestic CDLs, we can do it for international too. And that's how that door got open. So, but I have been doing research on it in spite of some other reporting. States cannot tell you matter of factly the breakdown between state domestic non-domiciled CDLs and international non-domiciled CDLs. There is not a clear breakdown. So those numbers, and even though FMCSA is going to look into it, that is going to be a nightmare because states have not been tracking it. So there's a big question mark on how many of those are actually international drivers with a non-domiciled CDL, and states cannot tell you who they've been giving them to.
But Duffy says they're going after auditing non-domiciled CDL drivers.
Again, but if states haven't kept data on them, they're going to have to go down to the molecular level and look at individual CDLs to see if they can figure out if it was an international issued or a domestic one. I mean, and I applaud them for trying to get a handle on this mess. I'm not at all being critical of the agency for going after this. It is something that needs to be answered, but man, the states have made a mess out of it straight away.
And the other thing is too is the fact that, like I said, this is one of those moments where the guys who don't like big government have to realize that at some level this isn't a big government program, but you've got to figure out some way to track that data, and that ain't going to happen in 2 months. The other thing is too, and I'm going to be really pessimistic here. I don't think in any universe that the moves they are making right now helps the capacity issue whatsoever. It's kind of like when you talk to most Americans about discretionary spending. They think if you cut some grant to the National Endowment of the Arts, you're going to balance the budget by doing that. It's not going to happen. What it will do, though, that is a very positive thing. A lot of these moves are, if you are a trucker who actually is making a decent living, it is going to improve that living. Meaning, if you're already making this market work for you, if the capacity crunch is putting a little pressure on you, but isn't like, it isn't basically forcing you out. You follow me? That if you are an established entity, an owner operator, work for a small company, and you're making your nut, it will improve their rates. It will improve their situation because they'll have flexibility behind the wheel. They'll have a little bit better bargaining power. They won't be competing with people who are just chipping away at their rates. But for people who are in this market struggling, it ain't the lifeline they think it is. That's just my prediction. I can't say it, but it will help the people who have been doing it right and making a living so far, is kind of my take. I don't know where you stand on that, Jamie, but I think it helps those people who were already making it in this tough market a lot.
Yeah, and the big thing is, and I thought this was a very profound statement the first time I heard it. I actually was able to do the exit interview with Annette Sandberg, who was one of the first administrators of FMCSA. And she talked about the pace of regulations, and that it's kind of like you have to have that trickle down time. If you're removing regulations, you have to figure out, okay, did we move the needle? How much did we move the needle? What more do we need to do? If you add a regulation, is that having the desired effect with reducing crashes or whatever? And so all of these things, well, they all look really, really great. If you go shotgun approach and all 9 of these things happened at once, I mean, it would actually probably cause a little bit of chaos in the industry, because everybody, it would change things so dramatically at first that it would make it confusing. But in the
I
end,
think it's great. Yeah, I think it's great. If everything happened at once, Jamie? I'm totally with you on this. If everything happened at once and you were a single owner operator with your own authority, just me and my Paul with a hammer and a saw, it would be fantastic. But for every other kind of model of owner operator, it's chaos. I mean, that's part of the idea too. I think part of the idea is to be in a perpetual state of disruption, John. I mean,
Well,
it's really interesting. Like I said, you're right though, Jamie. What would happen if you did all 9 of them like in 2 months?
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.